Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have another indie creator for you. His name is Dennis Robinson, and Dennis is the man behind Hive Head Studios and his flagship title, Lycan, Solomon's Odyssey, which is about the world's first werewolf. He is up to episode, book 4, and that is currently kickstarting. You need to get there. You need to do some catch up, get the first 3 chapters, and dig into this fascinating tale of werewolves and horror and drama and everything. This book has all kinds of things going on. Dennis has a lot of creativity in his head that he is getting out with this book and others, and he's about to tell you all about it. This is Dennis Robinson. Mr. Dennis Robinson of Hive Head Studios. Dennis, how are you?
Oh, I'm just living the dream as per usual in this not so wonderful temperate climate that I'm living in at the moment. But can't complain too much. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We can complain, and we often do complain.
That's
but
fair.
For now, we'll start out on a good foot. And,
sure.
As always, our first question is: how did you discover comics?
Technically, the way I discovered comics was when I was a kid, and this is dating myself a bit. When my mom would take us to the grocery store, they used to have comics, like in the grocery store, which they don't anymore. But so I would beeline to the comic section, and I would just start flipping through comics while she was doing the shop, like while she was grocery shopping. Most of the time, she would be done shopping out in the car, and like the announcer would come on and be like, "Hey." You should probably leave now, sort of thing, and I'd have to, scurry out. But at those days, I was really into Batman and Wolverine, stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you have any of your original purchases from that time period?
No, so back then, I didn't purchase too many comics, and my parents weren't the most interested in buying that stuff. I do remember I had a couple of Wolverines, one of which it was like Wolverine and he was kind of like a cyborg, and there was also like this little girl, and there was like a Yeti like sidekick that it had. I forget exactly. It had to have been in the 90s or something like that. But no, those were all lost to time. The comics that I've collected since I'm an adult, I still have, and some of them are still in the plastic sleeves. Otherwise, they're all in nice, neat stacks and things like that. But
good. We like readable copies around here,
Yeah.
Well loved, well read, and
Oh, yeah.
Not too precious about the condition.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not trying to buy like a 9.8 or any of that stuff.
Right.
I was like, well, I'm more interested in the story. I don't really care about collectability or anything like that.
I do feel bad for those wonderful stories that are entombed in plastic for all time. But
oh yeah,
I guess they're good investments to certain people.
It's true. Although
So,
I
go
knew a
ahead.
guy at a show. Sorry, not to get sidetracked. I met a guy at a show who he had bought like a 9.8 Spider-Man or something like that. And this was back when Stan Lee was still alive. And he got Stan Lee to sign this comic. But the problem was, so Stan Lee opens the flap on the plastic. The
Right.
tape caught the comic and ripped it as he pulled the comic out. So I ended up ripping I think it was either the back or the cover literally in half as Stanley pulls it out to sign it. And then Stanley then wrote like an extra special message in it. Be like, you're the only one with this.
Yes, a one-of-one collector's edition. I talked about this on another podcast where, after decades of this, plastic or mylar sleeve technology, how have we not gotten past just the pieces of tape that will do that on a very frequent basis? Like, no one has invented a better way of closing these things.
No,
I don't get it.
unless I suppose it. Well, no, because if you tried to do something with a magnet, it would probably just put like an impression in the book or whatever. If you laid something on top of it, and painter's tape is a hit or miss in terms of will it tear off the cover or not. So yeah, no, they have not come up with the sticky technology or the closing technology for these sleeves.
The person I was talking about this with suggested Velcro, which I thought was actually a pretty good uh, way of doing it. I mean, it's a lot more, labor intensive. You can't
Sure.
just you have to have two places and, opposite tensions, but it would not stick to anything that comes out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so when I do shows, so half the business that I have, so I write comics, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I also paint nerdy little landscape paintings in the style of Bob Ross. And so I have a big display that goes above the table. And the way I have them stuck is that I put the prints in like the plastic sleeves that you would get when you go to a show and you buy a print, except it's a little bit tighter than it would normally be. And then I put Velcro on the back of it, and then on the display there are little strips of Velcro, and then I can swap out, the whatever images based on the show I go to, because I paint, anything. Could be horror, could be Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, whatever. So depending on whichever convention I'm going to, I swap out the images. So that's how I get around that. I put some Velcro on the back of the plastic. Otherwise, yeah, if you tried to use tape and do it that way, I tried that once. It's a mess. I tried magnets. It was a mess. So Velcro, I figured that one out, and it's. I don't
yeah,
want to say it's stuck because that's too punny, but it is what it is.
it's the technology that doesn't die. And,
That's right.
successive generations are always rediscovering Velcro and its uses. So yes, let's not get sidetracked on Velcro and collecting technology or protection technology. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you first started thinking about actually making comics and when that was and what that was?
So that's a complicated story. So more than a decade ago, probably back in 2009, I had this idea because for mixing together the story of the world's first werewolf and just world mythology, like having this character run around the world and interact with all kinds of different mythology. Because at that time, I was really into the God of War games. So I was really big into mythology, and I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if you had a werewolf like in this time period and this time period. So I actually wrote out on some yellow notebook paper. I have them somewhere. I have no idea where it is in this house, but I have them. I know I do. While I was at Disney World, I wrote out like a timeline and like, oh, these are fun events that I would like to see happen with this, and this. And I literally put it in a drawer and just forgot about it because I said, yeah, I'm never going to make a comic book. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not a realistic, goal or anything like that. And then I started podcasting nearly 10 years ago, and we went to Dragon Con for our first year, and that was 2017, if I believe. And I ended up hanging out with a bunch of other podcasters that were on the network that I was on at the time. And, we're just talking nerd stuff. And I was like, hey, I had this idea like a decade ago. Like, what do you guys think? And they were like, you should do this. This is definitely a thing that you should pursue. And at that point, I didn't know how to write a comic book. So I wrote this weird sort of mutant hybrid between a book and a comic script. Like, it doesn't work as a book, and it doesn't work as like a comic script. It's somewhere in between. But the idea was to just get it on paper for people to check out and give me feedback on. So I wrote 5 chapters of this series and gave it to my friends that I knew would give me honest feedback. And they would say, oh, I like this. Like, you need to add more to this character, explain this character, go in more into this or that. And they gave me notes, and I would just tweak it over time. And then when I thought they were in a good spot, I was like, okay, well, now what do I do? And one of the people I'd met at Dragon Con, she is somehow friends with, if she were to give you the resume, like the list of names that she's just friendly with in terms of comic circles, it would make your head spin. It makes no sense. Like, she used to run around with Jim Starlin at shows. Like, he would invite her out to like Hawaii for shows and stuff like that. It makes no sense. But anytime someone tries to throw names around her, she puts them to shame. But so she knew this guy, Henri Kumpen, who does a series called Yisun Shin, I believe. And she was asking him like, hey, this is my friend Dennis, introduce me. What are your thoughts on like trying to find somebody who can help him out? And he put me in touch with his first editor he ever had. And so the guy was like, hey, nice to meet you. Send me over your scripts. So I sent over the scripts, and the email went something along the lines of, great. So there is nothing good about any of this. Like nothing, like you can't fix it. There's nothing's interesting or good, but you can pay me $1,800 and I'll teach you how to write something else. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. And I thought I was just going to hang it up. So that same friend who knows everybody went back to Henri because they were at some dinner or something like that. And she was telling him that story. And she started describing it. I don't know what her elevator pitch is. She won't tell me what her elevator pitch is. But when she pitches it, people get really, really, really excited. And I'm like, cool, tell me what you say so I could say that. She's like, I don't know. I'm just very excited about it. I said, okay. So he gives me a call and says, hey, send me the scripts. I want to take a look at them. And he read them and he goes, well, okay, your problem is you just don't know what you're doing. No one's ever told you how to write a script or anything before. So he sent me some reading material in terms of Will Eisner's Contract with God. And there was a couple more technical books on like writing comics and scripting and what you should put on the page in terms of panels and captions and things like that. And then he also mentored me in terms of, okay, this is what goes in a caption. This is how many panels per page you should have. This is how many, captions per panel, stuff like that. But also, here's what you should be putting in your captions. Like, the image should tell you almost everything you need to know about what's going on. The text should just be telling you what you can't see with the image, like the inner workings of the mind and things like that. So he and I worked together on that first book, and eventually, it got refined, and it was a wonky time because originally it was supposed to be, I wrote it out as like a 60 or 70 page outline, something like that. And he said, yeah, we don't want to do a 60-page book for your first book. We should probably cut it down to something like 24 pages. And he originally was like, we'll just take 60 and make it 24. I said, I don't think you could do that. That's too much story you're going to cut out. He's like, no, we can do it. Here, I'll write you an outline. I'll show it to you. And I was like, you got characters appearing and dying on the same page. Like, no one's going to care about these. So I wrote an outline, and he goes, okay, I think that'll work. But it was basically taking the 60-page book and splitting it into two 24-page books. And then COVID happened. And during COVID, we basically had finished the first book and we're already in the process of doing the second book. So I said, well, screw it. At this point, we may as well just stick the book back together and make it a 60-page book and just do the Kickstarter for one long book. And so in 2020, I think that was 2021, we did the Kickstarter. It was fall of that year. And then the book came out in 2022. And the art team has stayed the same. The editors have swapped around a little bit over time. But the team has stayed the same. And I actually ended up winning 7 awards for that first book. So it's kind of a weird little comic journey that I've gone on.
No kidding, but successful, as you've mentioned already. How did or which came first? Was it the story and the book, or Hive Head Studios? And how did you determine that you wanted to create sort of a studio or a name that went along with what you were working on?
So the story was, well, okay, actually this is more complicated now that I think about it. Oh boy. Okay, so kind of both. So the story technically came first. The reason the studio got made is because for business purposes, you have to do like LLC and taxes and all that stuff. I needed a business name. And I said, well, there are other stories that I'd like to write at some point. So I may as well have an umbrella name that isn't necessarily just Lycan. Because like the other stories I want to write, one's a fantasy-based story and one's a sci-fi future-based story. So I kind of figured, the name doesn't necessarily, for the studio, doesn't have to pertain to anything in particular. So that's how the studio came about. But the reason why I say it's complicated, that idea, Hive Head Studios, was actually birthed way back when I was in college. I went to art school for a little bit, and we had an art history course. And one of the projects we were working on was a flip book, as like one of the oldest forms of animation. And the flip book that I had made, it was literally just this little floating fat head with like a beehive haircut, except it was an actual beehive. And a bee flies out of the top of the head and flies around the screen, and the head's watching it, and then it just sort of like chomps it. And then the cheeks bulge a little bit, and then the head explodes into like 1,000 bees, and it spells out Hive Head Studios. And the teacher at the time was like, this is cute, but keep that name for later, because I think that's a really good name. And so, yeah, that's why I say it's a little bit of both. Technically, I had that name before I had written anything as far as the books go, but I didn't have any plans for it. And then I wrote the books and then thought, oh, I need a business name. And so that's the one I went with.
Makes sense. Let's talk about the book and
All
the
right.
story. Lycan Solomon's Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
You've already mentioned it's based on this idea of the first werewolf.
Yep.
Um, can you give a quick kind of elevator pitch for those who have not, read any of the books yet,
Sure.
but may be interested in getting into them?
Sure. So the elevator pitch that I typically give at shows is, so like in Solomon's Odyssey, it's a story of the world's first werewolf, and it's a little bit of horror, a little mythology, a little adventure, and a little history. The first book in the series is the origin story, sets everything in motion, and then every book in the series after that, it's the same main character, but he's traveling around to different regions and interacting with different regional mythologies, monsters, and gods. So that's the basic pitch, I would say. Like I said, the first book is the origin story. The second book goes into ancient Arabic mythology and folklore. The third book I describe as H.P. Lovecraft meets Gilgamesh. And then this fourth book that's going on Kickstarter in March, that one's set in ancient Egypt, so Egyptian gods and things like that.
Very, very cool. And I guess it begs the question, which is probably answered in the first volume, which I have not read yet. I'm going to do a big catch up once the fourth volume
Sure.
comes out. What does it mean to be the first werewolf? Because, from our traditional kind of understanding from the stories we've read, there are werewolves that are become werewolves, having been bitten by other werewolves.
Sure.
Like, how do you, go all the way back to the first one, and how does
Yeah.
that one become a werewolf if there's no one to bite him? It's the chicken and an egg story,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure. My idea is eventually going to be for the series that every type of werewolf you've seen in media does also exist in this same universe. It's like a spectrum, I say, where your far left end of the spectrum, it's almost entirely a wolf. So like if you've seen True Blood, they're literally just wolves. They're not even big wolves. They're just wolves.
Yeah.
And then on the opposite end of the spectrum would be like a werewolf from the TV show Supernatural, where it's basically just sharp teeth and claws. And that's it. Like they're just a person,
Right.
except for sharp teeth and claws. And then right smack in the middle is my character. It's like 50-50%, like 50% human, 50% wolf. Like the part of there were a few different werewolf designs that impacted the design for the werewolf in Lycan. One of which was the Van Helsing werewolf from the movie Van Helsing, like Hugh Jackman's, like that,
Yeah,
the black colored one. Part of it was also William from the second Underworld movie, and then part of it was also just basic wolf characteristics in terms of like eyes and ear placement, stuff like that. But I lost my train of thought. What was the question again? Sorry.
We were talking about sort of the regression
yes.
all the way to the beginning of the first werewolf.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first book is actually, the easiest way to sum it up would be it's similar to a Faustian bargain of sorts. The character is put in a position that he is not used to, which is a position of responsibility, and he gets kind of desperate. And when faced with sort of desperate decisions or desperate actions, he basically takes a desperate decision and makes a bad deal of sorts. He doesn't understand what that deal entails, but he makes a deal. And so that's how he sort of becomes the first ever werewolf. But he can't actually transfer it to anybody else. So if he does bite or scratch anybody, it does not transfer because of the way this particular version of lycanthropy works. And every book we kind of add a few more layers onto how that works. So like in the second book, we go in. So the first one sets it up, the normal moon comes out, boom, like full moon comes out, turn into a werewolf. Pretty standard. But we also set it up where if he gets too close to dying, similar to the Incredible Hulk, like if he gets too close to dying, he will also switch. Like he'll transform and be uncontrollable. The second book we set up magic is a thing, and various types of magic could cause a transformation or sort of delay it, things like that. The third book, if the level of grief is too much, he can actually, it's like another entity that he can speak to, but it doesn't speak back or anything yet at that point. So he just is in a very extreme level of grief and sort of just snaps. And then it's actually a very different look to the werewolf in the third book from any of the other books. And then the fourth book, we actually go into the soul and how that works. So we start to talk about that as well and how that impacts the lycanthropy. So his is a little different from how the standard werewolf story sort of works. And every book, we try to delve a little deeper into how everything works and the mechanics of everything in the universe and whatnot, while also expanding things in terms of, the third one I said was a mix of H.P. Lovecraft and Gilgamesh. This one talks about the afterlife and talks about different gods and how gods are made and things like that. So,
I mean, very, very cool expansion from the first initial idea, and it sounds very much like it's kind of almost a viral thing in that there are different strains of lycanthropy, as you call it.
Yeah. But like I said, that won't be for a while anyway. So right now it's just this one werewolf, but eventually down the pike, as we get further along, because I'm planning on doing 15 books in the series, assuming that I live long enough for that. So like later on in the series, we'll see other types of werewolves and interactions and, things like that.
Right. Okay. I'm going to wait for the Michael J. Fox Teen Wolf version.
Yeah,
to show
sure.
up eventually.
Playing basketball or boxing, depending on which one. Yeah.
I mean, that's a very specific strain.
Yeah.
The werewolf lore.
The car surfing basketball player. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, natural. It's a natural evolution. So I'm going to break down actually every word in the overall title of this. So we talked about Lycan a little bit, in terms of the werewolfness of the story. Let's talk about Solomon. Who is this character and what makes him a compelling protagonist and through line for what is becoming, a larger and larger story?
Sure. So Solomon is the main character of the story. He is the one that is who contracts the lycanthropy. And what I find compelling about Solomon is that he is not a standard hero character. He's also not like a vigilante character. He's more of a reluctant hero. He just kind of does whatever he feels like doing, and sometimes that ends up being like the right thing to do if it's convenient for him, so to speak. Yeah. In the first book, he is very aloof. So the first book takes place 8,000 BC in Mesopotamia. It's like a small village. It's right around the time where people started settling into villages and things like that. And his village is right on an oasis. And so his brother is the one that's in charge of the village. He comes from the family line that, runs things. But his older brother's the one that's in charge. So for him, he just kind of doesn't take a whole lot of anything seriously. He has his best friends. He has his older brother who's much more strict. But he is pretty aloof until he ends up getting put in a position that he's not used to and whatnot. As the story goes on, that's where you have this character who he has to, especially with the second book, he's dealing with loss, PTSD, like severe PTSD, hallucinations, things like that. And you kind of go along on this journey where he wants to stay by himself because he's absolutely terrified of himself and he has no idea what's going on. But also being by himself is making him crazy. And he is somebody that definitely needs that social connection. So it's like a weird little push me, pull you sort of thing with him. And the third book, and after the second book, it's a lot of him traveling, just trying to figure out, how do I find a cure for whatever this is? And that's sort of what leads him into each of the book's little adventures. Like the third one, he hears about these gods in what is, considered to be Sumeria. So he's going there to try and find these gods, see if they can cure him, because he tries witches, he tries magic, all this different stuff. He tries, offing himself a few times. Nothing seems to work. So he goes to this first ever city, actually, to try to figure out if they can do something for him. And they essentially promise him, like, hey, if you're good and you kind of keep everything going, eventually we'll reward you. So it's just sort of, he's kind of sticking through it and like, okay, well, eventually I'm trying to get this out of it. Fourth book, something similar. He's going to Egypt because he hears about the Egyptian gods, and they are experts in the soul and things like that. But when he gets there, he ends up meeting one of the particular gods who makes him an offer of, I'm not going to go into the details, obviously, but essentially like, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, sort of a thing. And that's kind of a through line where he doesn't really care about a lot of this stuff. He just wants what he wants out of it. He wants to be cured of this. He wants to be done with it. But he is this character who has a sarcastic sense of humor a little bit, and he does love the human interaction, even though it is very painful, because for him, a lifespan can kind of come and go very quickly. He can have children like anybody else. They don't turn into werewolves or anything like that. But he just keeps on living. They'll grow old and they'll die and all that stuff. So it's a whole layer of, he really wants a family and loves that sort of connectivity. But it's almost like a bittersweet, because then he'll be kind of punished for it, where he'll have to watch them, die and things like that. And he has to be very careful about where he lives, because when the moon's full, then he'll just wolf out and has no, like, he won't recognize anybody anymore. He'll kill anybody that's, in the vicinity. So he has to take extra special precaution, to be very, very far away from anybody and anything when the moon comes out. So I think that's what's compelling about the character most, is that it's not a story about a generic hero or a superhero or anything like that. He has powers, obviously, because he has lycanthropy, and even when he's in a human form, he's stronger than a normal person. He's a little faster. He can jump higher. He heals faster, stuff like that. But he's not using those abilities strictly for good or evil or anything like that. He's just like a normal person. Like, it depends on the situation that pops up, what he decides he wants to do.
I'm not going to get into Odyssey. I said I was going to do each of the words, but
Sure.
I think you've pretty much explained why it's an Odyssey. And, after what is going to be 15 books, and in expanding in all these different ways, I think we kind of get it.
Sure.
That he's going to be on an epic journey.
He's on a journey, yeah.
So let's talk about kind of the tone and genre of the book. And how would you describe it to someone who hasn't read it? And does it change book by book? Because you are kind of going to different places and different themes that you're exploring. So are you interested in kind of moving the book's focal points and genre in each book, or in each several books?
So as I described before, it's a little bit of a mix of a few things. So definitely horror aspects. It's a werewolf book. Adventure, going to different places and experiencing different things, and history. So I actually try to keep pretty close to the timeline of our history. It's just sort of like an alternate telling of events, so to speak. And then mythology, obviously, with different, gods and monsters and everything else. So that's kind of, I think it's a nice little sweet spot of a lot of different things. And I don't see myself switching off of that so much as just going into different mythologies and areas and having these different characters that have completely different personalities and things like that. So, for instance, the next book in the series after the fourth one, that one's going to be set in ancient Greece. So you have Greek gods, which, that's a totally different animal than Egyptian gods. And then after that, we're going to go to Asia. So you'll Wukong and, Journey to the East and stuff like that. So the tone, I don't think, is going to change very much. Other than, I will say that second book gets pretty dark in terms of, the PTSD and the depression and things like that. Depending on who you ask, the third one might be worse. In terms of, my editor would probably say the third one was worse for her in terms of making her sad. But yeah, I would say the overall tone, it's definitely going to stay adult. It's not going to lean in on, it's not going to become like a Deadpool jokey sort of breaking the fourth wall or anything like that, I would say. There is some sarcastic humor, mostly in the interactions between different characters, but that's about it as far as the humor goes. Yeah, so I would say that I don't really foresee it switching tones up too much, other than the fact that the setting changes, and with the changing setting, that kind of messes with the tone just a smidge, just because you kind of have to with the different tones.
Right. We have the fourth chapter coming up, kickstarting, and you said you're looking to make this a 15-book cycle or saga. How much of that is planned out, and is the ending, the very ending, planned out already, or is it something you feel like you're going to kind of organically discover as you go along?
I know what happens on the last page of the last book already. So so it's specifically planned out to book 5. And that's mostly because that old mutant version of the books, that was the first 5 chapters. So it's actually staying fairly close to those in terms of the overall plot. After that, it'll all be new in terms of, it'll be the first time that I'm writing those scripts, but the plot line is figured out as far as what's happening in each and every book. It's not specifically in terms of every single detail, but the general idea of what I want to happen in books, 6 through 10 and then 11 through 15, that's all figured out. And like I said, I know what I want on the last page of the last book, so.
Good. I like a person with an ending in mind and a goal to strive towards.
So I used to watch the TV show Supernatural a lot, and one of the things that really struck me about it early on, anyways, the original show writer Eric Kripke, he had written the entire 5 seasons down, like before the show had even started, so he knew where everything was going to go. Now, granted, CW then liked how successful it was, so he left the show and it just kept going, but the idea, anyways, was that this is the contained story. This is how it ends. I liked that idea. So when I went into this project, I had a similar mindset where it's like, okay, what's going to happen? What's the end point? And then what's the skeleton, in between? And then as I write each book, that's where I'm filling in the meat and potatoes and all that jazz.
Let's talk about the collaborative process. You
Sure.
have a whole team behind you. You've referenced an editor already,
Yep.
obviously artists, colorists, letters, all of this whole team sort of churning and working in the same direction. What is that creative and collaborative process like? Are you churning out, full scripts? Are you working Marvel style? And what do each team member kind of add to the overall, product?
So usually I have the script done before production starts. And the way that works now that we have more than one book out, while they're producing whatever book it is, I'm writing the next book. So that way, by the time they finish with the book, the next one's ready to go. So if they wanted to start right away, they could. That's sort of how that works in terms of the script writing stuff. So I do write the whole thing out before the artists get it or anything like that. Then my editor takes a look at it. So it's a different editor than the one I had mentioned before. And I especially like her as my editor because she gets the characters in a way that nobody else that I've worked with does. So what I mean by that is, so the second book, for instance, I had these 3 witch characters. And so I had, dialogue and all that. And she goes, okay, so the way you have these 3 talking, it's written in the way that this other character would talk, but that's not how they would talk. They would talk like this. And so she would give me like a tone shift. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then I could, change up their dialogue for the rest of the book. Or, I don't think this character would do this. It doesn't really make sense for his character to do that. So that's sort of the play back and forth that she and I have. As opposed to I guess a lot of times normal editors is more along the lines of just making sure your punctuation's correct or you don't have anything misspelled or things like that. I really like that back and forth that she and I have as far as the editing process goes, especially when, for the third book, for instance, as I mentioned before, that's probably the more traumatic book for her. I already know what's going to happen because I wrote it, obviously. So I'm watching her comments as she leaves them, as she's reading it. And she's like, okay, that's really sad, Dennis. But it's just that one, right? And then I'm like, scroll. Okay. Not okay. Like, but this is it, right? You're not going to do it. You're not going to keep doing it. Scroll. And it just, at the end, she left a comment of, I hate it. I hate you. I love it. So that relationship is really cool. And I really enjoy working with her. And the rest of the art team, they've been on since the beginning. So I have an artist, a colorist, and a letterer. I do not have an inker because of the style that I'm going for. I didn't think it needed the inker. And the reason for that was when I was looking at the style that I wanted to go for with the book, my first editor was like, go to a library or a comic shop and just look at books and see what speaks to you. And there was a book I found at the library called, I think it was called Love the Lion. There's not a single word of dialogue in the entire thing because it's just the perspective of a lion in the Serengeti. But the whole thing looks like it's almost watercolor painting or colored pencil or something like that. There's no thick lines. It's all thin. And I really liked that style. So I kind of carried that over for this book. So we don't have an inker. But the artist, Sal, so his name's Sal Denaire. He's out of Spain. And he and I have a good relationship too because I'm very, very specific in the script. Like literally the captions are, this is the time of day, this is where the camera is, this is the angle the camera's at, this is who's in the shot, this is where they are in the shot, this is what they're doing in the shot. Like it's a chunk of text. Because I have other artist friends that say that their writers are just like, this happens on the page, so just kind of, make it work. Okay. And so most of the time Sal will just do whatever's in the panel, but other times he'll look at the page because he sketches it out first. And he'll look at the page and he'll be like, you have this in this panel, but I think this might be a cooler idea where there isn't a strict rectangle. He does a lot of times where that image will end up carrying over into the other panels for this really cool sort of effect. And so most of the time when he comes up with an idea like that, I'm like, yeah, sure, go with it. Sometimes, because there's sometimes a little bit of a language barrier, he'll have an idea and I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really work for what we're going for here. For instance, the example I always use in the third book, I say there's this character who wall runs up over the market stands because he's a god character and he's like a little kid. So he just wall runs over the market stands. He had no idea what I was talking about. He's like, what are you talking about, wall run? And so I looked up videos from Prince of Persia and stuff like that and showed. He's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense. So that's the only time we run into like any sort of issue. But he and I have never had like an argument or anything like that. And usually we're pretty collaborative in terms of he'll tell me if he thinks something's not going to work, and we'll just go back and forth trying to make it fit. The colorist and I, so it was funny when they joined the project. He did the first page, and I said, this is good. However, I'm somebody who loves color, and I don't need it to look like hyper realistic. I said, in fact, because we're in the desert, so you're going to have a lot of browns and yellows and things like that. I was like, at nighttime, I want Aladdin colorscape, so purples and blues and oranges and things like that. And the color was like, absolutely, more color, love more color. And so his name's Ezekiel Dominguez. He's out of Argentina, and amazing job as well. And then my letterer is Joel Saavedra, who I found through my first editor on recounts because that's his letterer as well. And he's also out of Argentina. And he does a fantastic job. He actually explained to me how he approaches lettering. And because I didn't really think too much of lettering, I figured, you're just putting words in bubbles. No big deal. He literally showed me a page, and then he drew a line. He's like, I put these bubbles in such a way that I want the eye to track around the page in a certain like path. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that he was doing it. And that just seems so neat to me that he's literally influencing how the reader reads the page just in the way that he lays the bubbles out. So, that gave me a much deeper appreciation for lettering and how much how much can go into it. And yeah, that's the entire team.
I mean, that seems like a great, well-oiled machine, and everybody's doing their part to make a great book. And yeah, you're extremely lucky, I would
Yes.
say.
Say
You know, I don't want to take away from, you know, the organizational skills that you have and others have, and the collaborative skills,
No, sure.
but yeah, that's very from what we've heard from other kind of indie publishers. That's very difficult feat to achieve. So
Yeah. Oh,
kudos.
yeah.
Let's talk about Kickstarter.
Sure.
You've done previous chapters on Kickstarter. You have this
Yeah. One
chapter
for each one.
4.
So this will be my fourth one.
What have you learned from the previous campaigns that you're now going to put into this new one?
Literally every campaign, I learned something, and I spend between 6 and 12 months doing research and planning and prepping for Kickstarters before they even launch. Like I do a dumb amount of prep work before the Kickstarter goes because I'm always paranoid about it, especially with Kickstarter because, you know, if you don't make the goal,
Yeah.
you don't get the money, that sort of thing. And so I always put in a lot of work in the Kickstarter, even the video. Like I do way too much. like I, it, like each one of the Kickstarter videos, it's like a through line. Like it's one story that continues from Kickstarter to Kickstarter, and it's black and white. It's kind of based around Larry Talbot from the original Wolf Band, like Larry Talbot Jr., I should say. But it's also just goofy, and every video is goofy while also trying to tie in the fact that it's a Kickstarter video and explain everything. So I always do too much as far as the Kickstarters go. But the thing I learned the most from the first Kickstarter was do not pick rewards, especially stretch goals, that are going to cost you more money than it'll make it worth. For instance, I thought a hat would be a really cool idea. So one of the stretch goals was a hat. So everybody got a hat. Well, hats are actually pretty expensive. So everyone getting a free hat at a certain level, that adds up after a while, and then you just end up losing a lot of money. The second Kickstarter, I thought I remedied this. I did a glow-in-the-dark t-shirt, and I was quoted at a certain number, but when I went to order the t-shirts, the number they quoted me on wasn't exactly right, and it ended up being anybody who backed at that level, I lost $5 for the because the t-shirts ended up being so much more than I thought they were going to be. So I've learned, okay, now we have to have our manufacturers figured out, like exactly what's going to be. If anything, you could even order it before the Kickstarter, so that way there's no discrepancies, or you know exactly what you're getting into whenever you get in the Kickstarter. So yeah, so those are the big lessons that I've learned in terms of making sure that your rewards are something that is valuable to the customer, but also not going to break the bank on your end and basically defeat the entire purpose of what you're doing the Kickstarter for, because I pay for everything out of my own pocket. So the first book and the second book were done before we even did a Kickstarter. So I had paid everything outright for the first book and for the second book before the Kickstarter even happened. And the first book, if memory serves, cost me, with the printing costs, about $22,500. And then the second book cost me about $23,500. And then the third book cost me about $33,500. And because the books keep getting longer.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth book's even longer. So I think I'm up on this one about somewhere in the 35s range or so. So I'm paying for that straight up out of my pocket, and then the Kickstarter helps reimburse some of that. Because the first Kickstarter, I set the goal at, I think it was $6,600, and we ended up generating $10,000. And I remember I did a podcast interview, and they're like, "That's amazing! You made a profit on your first Kickstarter." I said, "No, no, I didn't. I just set it at a reasonable level, because if you're doing your first Kickstarter, you can't set your goal at $20-some thousand,
No.
unless you're a celebrity or something like that. You have to set it at something you think you can get. So the first one was at $6,600. The second one was at $8,000. The third one was at $10,000. This one's at $10,000. I figure this is a nice roundish number to just go with for a goal, and I know that I can attain that kind of thing. So, yeah. So those are the main lessons I've learned. Not to trust the post office. That's another one. That's a big one that I've figured out as well. But yeah, so those are the biggest lessons I would learn in terms of rewards, planning. I literally have a spreadsheet where I list out, okay, this is how much this item's going to cost per unit. This is how much we're charging per unit. So, like, what's the difference and things like that. Just to make sure that no tier I end up losing money on, like in that second Kickstarter. But yeah, those are the biggest lessons. And a lot of that stuff that I learned before the Kickstarter, I got through books. Like there was a book, Kickstarter Secrets by, I can't remember his name. Greg Pak, I believe it was. He wrote Code Monkey Saves the World. That was a really useful book, and that one came out in 2016, and I still find most of the information to be super, super useful. There's a million books out there now, and there's YouTube channels and all that jazz. But yeah, I would say those are the biggest lessons I've learned.
Now, having done uh, now 3 successful campaigns, and we're crossing our fingers. I'm sure the fourth will be successful as well. Have you received any feedback from the backers, from the readers, that you've particularly either enjoyed, or anything that you've taken to heart, if there is any sort of constructive or like either criticism or
Sure.
questions about certain characters or the thrust of the story? What's that feedback like, and what have you taken from it?
So different stuff. So most of the time it's positive. There's one individual that I've met at DragonCon many times, and he had a bit of criticism that I couldn't figure out. He was like, there are artifacts on the pages that are just text, like the thank you page.
Hmm.
He's like, there's artifacts on there. I'm looking at it, and I don't see what he's talking about. And as it turns out, there were artifacts, and it was because when I would send it to the printer, it would be compressing the image. So they tell you, like, put it all in a zip file and then send it over. So I learned, oh, you have to send that page individually to the printer, so that way it doesn't get compressed, and then it gets rid of those artifacts. And literally for the third book, I had done that, and he messaged me right after he got his book. He's like, "You did it! You got rid of the artifacts." I was like, "Great! I still don't see them. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm glad I did it." I had a buddy who he used to have a comic book podcast, actually, the Blazing Defender Report, way back in the day, and he did this lengthy review of the book for me. He sent me a video, and this was for the first book. And his one criticism was there's one spot in the first book that feels like it's a bit disjointed, and it kind of comes and goes quickly. And I said, that's funny, because remember how I told you the book started as 60 pages, then was split into 24 pages?
Yep.
Well, it went from 60 to 24, and then from 24 to 26 to 28 to 30. So, like, it kept, like, moving around and changing things. And so because it got chopped up so many times, and that one scene did get a bit wonky. And I was like, yeah, 100%. I know exactly the scene you're talking about without even having to look at it. If I were to do that book over now the same way that I do the rest of the books, there wouldn't even be an issue, because literally I write it as, I don't care how long it's going to be. The first 2 books were 60 pages of story with 12 pages of extras. The third book ended up being 96 pages. The fourth book is 108 pages. The fifth book, the outline for it, is 151 pages. So now I write it because I know the story that I want to tell. So I don't care how long it is in order to tell the story that it is, that I want to tell. So I don't have to worry about those sorts of transitions or anything like that. So I haven't had that happen again for any of the other books. It was just for that first one. And, I had a few other people say something similar where they would say, yeah, there's a couple spots where it feels like it jumps a little bit. And I said, yes, well, it was fleshed out at one point, and then had to cut some stuff and move some stuff around and make things fit. So, yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe one day, if I ever get a chance, I'll go back and just redo that first book and just, fill in those gaps, or redo a couple pages here or there, something like that. But that's a down the road sort of issue. But yeah, but for the most part, everyone seems to enjoy everything. I haven't gotten a lot of, I don't think I've gotten anything that's just straight up negative. I've gotten constructive criticism, like I said, with the weird artifacts. But other than that, everything, people just give either constructive criticism or they just say they enjoy the
Enjoyed the
books.
book.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
makes me
that's
happy.
great. That's great to hear. Uh, so, I have a couple closing questions, but before I get to it, I always like to ask, and I know this is Lycan is the passion project, and
Sure,
you have a plan, and this is your, direction you're going into. But
sure.
we're gonna play sort of this game that out of nowhere,
Okay,
someone from the big publishers or big IP houses, I hate to even use that sort of term,
sure.
comes to you and says, we like what you're doing here on Lycan. We want you to take over whatever you want, Marvel, DC, whatever.
Hmm.
Are there characters or their books or their stories that you would jump at the chance to get your hands on, if only for a little bit, and then go back to Lycan?
So that's with this scenario. I'm going to assume that I'm not working my soulless corporate job that I already am, which the only reason I'm doing is to pay for the books. Um, in a perfect universe, I would say, I would like writing Swamp Thing. I think that'd be fun because that's also similar in terms of, you got that little bit of horror or a lot of bit of horror depending on the particular story you're going for, and it's also always had that sort of monster vibe to it. I wouldn't mind even working on like a Universal monster movie, or not monster movie, but like the Universal monsters, like putting them into a series of books and making that a universe and all that jazz. That would be kind of fun too. But I would say Swamp Thing because while I love Batman and Wolverine and stuff like that, I feel like I wouldn't. I'm not sure if there's anything I could come up with that hasn't already been done. And some of those characters they're very touchy with,
Hmm.
where I've met writers, I know writers where they tell them like, yeah, cool, you have a lot of great ideas. You're not allowed to do any of that with this character.
Yeah.
So, like I met oh Christopher Priest at a convention, and we were chit chatting, and because his table was literally right next to mine. This is a funny story because I don't know anybody. Like literally, I could walk into just about any famous comics person. I have no idea who it is because I just don't know people in general for mostly anything. And so he's sitting up next to me, and I don't know who anybody is. So I'm like, "Oh, hey, my name's Dennis Robinson. How you doing?" He's like, "Oh, Christopher Priest." I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." And he goes, "You don't know who I am, do you?" I said, "Nope, not an idea." And he just reads off his resume, and I said, "I should probably know who you are." Yeah. He's like, and so he, at the time, anyways, so he actually seemed to like the idea better that I didn't know who he was because he
Yeah.
hates when people fanboy out on him. So he and
It
I
must be
just
refreshing.
yeah, so he and I just shot the shit for the entire weekend, like just about anything and everything, and it was a grand old time. And we were talking about projects, and he described working for, the two big ones, DC and Marvel, and he was at the time, and he was working for DC. He said it's weird as a writer because you are supposed to be creative on a schedule. He gets a notification from DC, hey, we need you to come up with an idea that we've never seen before by Monday. And it's Friday. It's like, how does that work? Like, oh, okay, let me just be creative on your timetable. He said he did not like that, it seemed. But we were talking, and he's like, yeah, I write Superman. I was like, oh, I don't like Superman. He's like one of my least favorite characters. He's like, really? I was like, yeah, he's boring. Like, there's, eh. And he goes, that's because you never read my Superman. I said, I don't know, man. I'm just really not into Superman. He goes, he doesn't even use his. He's like, I'll send you a book. I'll email you a book. He's like, he doesn't even use his powers one time. I said, okay. I'm curious. And literally, it was like Superman adrift in space, losing his mind. And I was like, okay, this is actually a pretty good story because, he's not OP. He's just lost in space talking to an AI, just kind of slowly losing it. I was like, okay, this is actually a pretty interesting take on that character. And where you could still kind of do something new with him without, treading on any of the tried and true stuff. So, but yeah, that's a long-winded answer to say that, yeah, that's probably what I would like to work on if ever offered anything by the big companies.
All right, Swamp Thing, DC, if you're listening. I had the opportunity to interview Priest, and yeah, breath of fresh air.
Oh, yeah.
Love his takes on everything. He was at that point, I think he still is doing this work with Vampirella, which is kind of redefining that
Okay.
character that we all know from mostly the skimpy outfit.
Yep.
So yeah, I love his angles on things. So I'm glad you got to have a whole weekend to
Yeah.
talk
Let's
to
go.
him.
Yeah.
Fun times. So beyond this Kickstarter, we know there are going to be more and more in the Lycan universe.
Hmm.
Any other projects that are stewing? I mean, I'm sure this takes up enough of your time as it is. So if there is nothing else, that is totally fine. But anything else brewing at Hive Head Studios? And is there something that, are you willing to take on other projects that you yourself have not originated, let's say?
Sure. I have had people ask if I would write some stuff up for, their different projects. The problem is, as you mentioned, time, because I have a 40 plus hour a week job as it is, and I go to conventions on the weekends to sell books and whatnot. Last year I did 27 shows. I don't recommend that many. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. This year I only have 18. I'm going to drive myself crazy in March because I'll have 4 straight conventions. So it'll be work all week, go to convention, work all weekend, come home, work all week, and do the Kickstarter at the same time. There are other projects that I'd like to do. The issue for that isn't so much time, is money, because I can't really afford to do another project where I'm doing all of the banking of everything. Once the plan has always been, once Lycan can kind of break even to a certain point, then I'll start working on other projects where I can, start throwing myself in there. Like I said, I have 2 other projects in mind, at least. One of them is sort of like a sci-fi, futuristic, kind of a Gundam vibe to it a little bit. That one I have a title for it. It's called Scrappy. And then I don't have a title for the third one. It's more of a D&D campaign kind of, but more of a dark fantasy sort of vibe to it. I've been tempted to make a comic out of the comedy D&D podcast that I do, but I feel like I'd kind of rather do something I haven't already done before as opposed to rehashing something that I already have. Those are the 2 projects that I have in the back burner that I'd like to work on at some point. But again, like I said, that's more of a financial aspect. Once Lycan gets to a certain point, I'll start writing these other books, which are very different. Might even do a different art team just because the styles aren't going to be the same or anything like that. But yeah, I've been asked to do other projects in terms of writing stuff. I always say no because I just don't have time.
Yeah. And you want to maintain,
yeah.
I was going to say you want to maintain the quality of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't want to sort of sacrifice on that to take your focus off and do many things at an average level rather than one thing at a high level.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other things that I do. Like I said, I do the nerdy landscape paintings as well, which takes up, most of whatever free time that I still have left. I do narrations for podcasts. I did a buddy's audiobook. There's another book. There's actually a book that I'm working on. It's a biography about my dad. So I'll probably put it out under the Hive Head, logo at some point. I did a 5-hour interview with my dad, so I don't have to. I've recorded it, so that way I can go back for notes and whatnot. So that's another thing that I'm planning on doing. So I have lots of things that I'd like to do and like to work on. It's just a matter of, we'll see where it falls in terms of the time that I have to allot to it.
Sure. Well, where can fans find more information about you, about Hivehead, about Lycan, and the Kickstarter? We'll put the info in the show notes, but
Sure.
where can we all follow what you're up to?
So you can find me on Linktree, at Hive Head Studios. My social medias are Hive Head Studios, so you can find me on there. The website for Lycan and everything else is hiveheadstudios.com. If you want to check out the first 18 pages, I believe, of the first book, you can do so for free over on the store on hiveheadstudios.com. Like you can get a PDF for free. And I have PDFs for the full books as well as the physical books and all the other stuff in terms of my werewolf merch and my nerdy little landscape paintings and all that jazz. But the Kickstarter you can easily find at www.lycanbook.com. That's the easy redirect to the Kickstarter page. The pre-launch, well, this will be coming out when it's live, so you can also just search for it on Kickstarter at Lycan Solomon's Odyssey Chapter 4.
And we're back. Dennis, thanks for being on the show, and good luck with the Kickstarter. Everybody out there, go back the Kickstarter. Remember, it's called Lycan, Solomon's Odyssey, and it is Chapter 4 that is kickstarting right now, I believe, till the end of March 2026. So go out there and back this creative, amazing new story. That's it for today's episode and this week's episodes of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing. Thanks for going to our Patreon. Thanks for going to the Believe Network. Thanks for everything that you do to support this show. We appreciate it. We want to hear from you. Please reach out, contact us, get on Dollar Bin Banter on Facebook. Let's get this conversation going. Let's get this community growing. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.